So as we get out of the position battles, let's go ahead and talk late round sleepers, Mike. Now this is where it kind of gets fun. This is where you and I like to go deep. And you had sent me some names, and I was like, man, I don't think I really went deep enough on this names because we really wanted to kind of go like these are guys where if you're in a 25, 30 round draft, you're getting in one of those last 3, 4, 5 rounds before you're required to get your second tight end or your second defense, right? So this was kind of fun putting this list together. We have 5 names. I'm sure we probably could have put together about 10 each, but we'll give everybody 10 in total. Why don't you go ahead and fire away? Why don't you give us your first deep sleeper on your list?
Yeah, this is one I actually don't have a ton of shares of, but I've gotten a few lately, and it's Anthony Eager from South Alabama. And this is not a selection of hey, we're questioning Devin Voisin. We don't think he's going to be wide receiver one. I don't. That's not really the case here. Voisin was an absolute stud throughout the spring from all reports. Like he crushed it in every single spring scrimmage that South Alabama had. But this is really a system play here because if you look at Major Applewhite, they have a condensed target share almost every single year, right? Where it's not only the wide receiver one, but it's the wide receiver two, and it's rarely anybody else, right? Even if there's a third guy involved in the passing game, like it's nothing beyond that. This isn't like USC where you're going to see wide receiver four, wide receiver five, and those guys get involved too. It's really a condensed target share between the top 2 to 3 guys. And Eager really established himself as the wide receiver two coming out of spring ball. So, that's a guy. And look, let's be honest, Devin Voisin, seventh year senior, like he hasn't truly popped to this point, in his career. So maybe it just doesn't end up happening for him, and Eager is the guy to own. So I like that the South Alabama passing game is really going to funnel between these two receivers.
Yeah, I think this is a really good one because Anthony Eager was a guy that I know I was looking at a lot in the spring. And so, to your point, though, I think what we do is you've got 2 wide receivers who we're just deadlocked is like, hey, it's going to be these 2 guys are going to be the top guys. And Voisin probably most likely is wide receiver one. But I think there's really good value there for Anthony Eager considering where you can get him in drafts for sure. And Mike, I'll stick with the wide receiver theme. And here's a name that I'll throw out, and this one I think surprises me a little bit, and maybe it's just some of the product where maybe there's just draft fatigue or people just want to go big or go home. But a couple of the drafts I've done just recently, Griffin Wild, the wide receiver from Northwestern, he's the transfer from South Dakota State who caught 71 passes for 1,000 yards last year, had a dozen touchdowns. Northwestern brings in Preston Stone at quarterback. Sure, we can sit here and make fun and wonder, whether or not that's an upgrade at quarterback, but they do have somebody that can get him the ball. And I just scooped him up in like the 26th round of a 30 round draft. And the one thing that I'm seeing in a lot of drafts that we're doing, I think if there's one really strong theme that stands out, and it seems like this happens every year, but it's really strong this year. There's a high propensity to go up and get quarterbacks, running backs early and just punt on receivers till late in the draft. And I just feel like that's the type of guy who most likely could be a go-to target at Northwestern, where they're going to have to throw in ball games late. Just think there's great value there getting a wide receiver one, maybe at Northwestern and round 20, just a wide receiver one in general, particularly in PPR leagues, in round 26 of a 30 round draft.
Yeah, I agree. And this is kind of gross because my next guy is also a Northwestern player. And I love that we're choosing two sleepers from one of the worst offenses in the Big Ten. But, here we are.
Yep.
This is a change that I've made officially. I think I'm going to talk you into making this a change in the CFF guide. But I've moved over to Joseph Hyman over Cam Porter as their RB1 for Northwestern. I think the biggest sticking point to me, honestly, is Northwestern went to media days. You would think maybe they'd bring back their previous starter the last 2 years. No, they brought in Joseph Hyman along with them to media days. So you kind of wonder there, why are they doing that? And then you start to do a deeper dive into the stats. He averaged 4.9 yards per carry last season on 52 attempts, outplayed Cam Porter. He had 4.56 yards after contact and then a 65% breakaway percentage according to Pro Football Focus. All those numbers dwarf Cam Porter's numbers, who's just a very inefficient runner. So there's a couple other things too I like. I mean, look, Northwestern, I think that early schedule is a little appealing, right? You get Tulane
Yep.
in the opener, FCS opponent. I believe Western Illinois, maybe I could be wrong there. UCLA is solid. There is a bye week mixed in there, but then you get outside of the first 4 weeks and you get Louisiana Monroe too. I
Yep.
think in week 5 or 6. So that starting schedule for Northwestern is appealing for them. And then lastly, they were obviously poor on offense last year, but their offensive coordinator who came over from South Dakota State, when he was there, he had 3 straight years where his RB1 had 1,400 yards rushing. We're obviously not projecting that for the Northwestern running back one, but if Hyman gets that RB1 duty and, they're improved this year, I think you could see a 700 to 800 yard rusher there.
Yeah, what's funny is I remember us back in the spring and Northwestern dropped their roster and we were like, Cam Porter's still at Northwestern. He's still at Northwestern. We've got to add him back onto the projections. We thought that he was long gone. So
Yeah, just like Devin Voice in a seventh year senior, it feels
exactly. Yeah.
like. Yeah.
Yeah, no doubt. So my second name I'm going to throw up there is Trell Harris from Virginia. And I thought and the reason I throw him up there, I think we just had a draft as well, the 30 rounder, and a couple of drafts. Because everybody punts on receivers, he's going incredibly late. I mean, round 23 of 30. I think back a lot, Malachi Fields obviously leaves Virginia. When I think back to last year, Trell Harris got off to a pretty solid start. He had 70 yards receiving at least in two of the first three games and had a touchdown catch in two of the first three games. He gets injured. He goes out the entire year. Virginia's going to need a wide receiver one this year. Again, we're getting late where all those wide receiver ones and twos from Oregon and Bama and Clemson, they're all gone, right? And so what you do as you get into the later rounds of the draft is you start looking for potential wide receiver ones in offenses instead of jumping on wide receiver twos or threes around the country, where I gave Griffin Wild as the first name. I'm seeing Trell Harris too slipping a lot later than I really like, and I'll take him round 23 of a 30 round draft if he's my fifth and sixth, seventh wide receiver off the board at that point.
Yeah. I mean, 24 targets in 4 games last year as the wide receiver two there. So if he's healthy, he should be good.
And then I'll stick with another receiver there as we transition into the third one. And I think I kind of teed it up when we were talking about position battles. And I just bring up Justice Lowe with Oregon. I don't think he's really going to wow anyone, but Oregon may not need a wild receiver depending on how DeCorian Moore and Kenyon Sadiq look at tight end and how the freshman looks. Will their wide receiver two need to take the top off? I don't know. It's a possibility they bring in Malik Benson, right? They still have Jeremiah
Gary Bryant.
McClellan as well, right? But Justice Lowe came in last year and he was just a solid player. And you know what? We don't have a lot of answers right now at wide receiver two in Oregon. And I'm just going with the guy that at least last year showed that he can be steady in that lineup. 30 round best ball draft that we just completed, Mike. I scooped him up in the last round of the draft, round 30, for a potential wide receiver two in Will Stein's offense. I'm going to take that all day, every day. That was my next name on the list.
Do you remember why he entered the starting lineup last year?
I thought there was an injury.
Wasn't an injury, but somebody was out of the lineup, obviously. That was when Trayshawn Holden spit on an
Okay.
Ohio State
There
player,
you
and
go.
that's when Justice Lowe came in. So, yeah, just a quick tidbit there. Yeah, my next guy, wide receiver. We've kind of talked about this team a lot, actually, in previous podcasts, but Syracuse and Jonte Cook. There's a bit of separation in drafts between he and Daryl Gill, and I'm still on Daryl Gill for wide receiver one, but I can absolutely see a scenario where Jonte Cook ends up as the wide receiver one, probably because I would think he's probably more talented than Daryl Gill at this point, right? A former 4 star, prospect, originally with Texas. So I think the thing to note here, a couple things. The OC Jeff Nixon, right? Syracuse might throw the ball a bit less this year, but if you look back, Jeff Nixon, the offensive coordinator, he's had a 100 target receiver
Yeah.
uh, every year that he's called plays in at the collegiate level, dating back to his time at Baylor. So if Jonte Cook ends up as the wide receiver, one there, it could be really, bountiful for fantasy purposes. And I think the second thing that's getting overlooked here, we're focused on, Jackson Meek's gone, Traver Pena gone. But Aranda Gadsden and his 108 targets are gone as well. And I think we agree on this where Dan Villari, the projected tight end one there, he's not getting 100 targets. He might not get 50 targets, right? So there is a lot of room for these targets to be spread around at the Syracuse wide receivers. And I think there's a scenario where not only is a good fantasy option, Jonte Cook, two Syracuse wide receivers are a good fantasy option, maybe even three, right?
Yep.
Maybe Justice Ross Simmons get those 100 vacated targets from Aranda Gadsden too. So I like the value you can get with Cook. And shoot, I like all three Syracuse
Yeah,
wide receivers.
I like the name right there because we talked about with Gadsden gone, Justin Ross Simmons, you've got Cook, you've got Gill. All three of those guys have fantasy value. We were doing position battles earlier and we were talking about Syracuse, and I was like, okay, is it going to be Ricky Collins? Is it going to be Angeli? Could there be rotation? It doesn't really matter. Whatever quarterback Syracuse lands on, we know who the top three wideouts are likely going to be. So those guys are going to get targets all game. We may not know who the quarterback is right now, but as far as being a safe top three when it comes to target share, those three guys are probably the three splitting the biggest target share in that offense.
Yeah, and then another underrated point is maybe Yassine Willis doesn't get the targets that LaQuint Allen did
Yeah.
last year too. So I think there's a lot of room for all three, and in particular Cook to be fantasy relevant.
Yeah, so I'll throw out the next name, and this is one that man, I've tried to get a couple of times late in drafts, and I've missed out on him. Our friend Andrew Katz, I've done a couple of drafts with him over the last few weeks, and I think maybe he's the guy that snagged him before me. But I've had my eyes on Salah Hayden Allah, the running back at Oregon State. I just think that offense, if you think back to the beginning of last year, that offense was really built for a two-back system. And I think was it Jam Griffin that was with Anthony Wilkerson, got banged up, and then Wilkerson kind of took over that job full time.
Yep.
And I feel like Allah is really destined for that running back two role. And I'll be really curious to see how much work he gets and whether or not that really eats into Anthony Hankerson's role there in the offense. Because right now he's going early in drafts, and I don't think anyone is really taking into account that maybe Allah could eat into his workload a little bit.
Yeah, and I think he is the perfect kind of handcuff. And I'm one of these people, if you don't like spending a first round pick on Anthony Hankerson, then I think using your last selection in any draft to get Allah there is really wise because I think it's just going to be like what you said. We're probably going to see both of them like we saw Hankerson and Griffin to start last year.
Yep. Who's next on your list?
Uh, Hayden Reed at Army.
Okay.
This is a guy that I've started to scoop up a little bit. I don't think Army offense is going to take a huge step back this year, even without Bryson Daly. And I think the big thing for me is that, we like Dwayne Coleman as the projected starter taking over for Bryson Daly at QB1. He's about 30 pounds lighter than Bryson Daly, who rushed for 32 touchdowns last year. Uh, I wouldn't be surprised if Dwayne Coleman doesn't get half of the 32 rushing touchdowns that Daly had last year. So
Good point.
those, assuming Army doesn't take a step back offensively or not a huge step back, those touchdowns got to go somewhere. And we saw exactly what we saw Hayden Reed to end last year, stepping in for Kanye Udo in the bowl game, rushing for 114 yards on 20 carries against Louisiana Tech. So if you don't think Dwayne Coleman is going to run as much as Bryson Daly or get the red zone volume that Daly got, I think those touchdowns are going to be distributed to Hayden Reed.
Yeah, there's just so much volume to go around when it comes to potential touchdown vultures in that offense now. And to your point, I just not neither one of us are really confident that Coleman's going to carry that value that they had there at quarterback last year.
Mhm.
They have to go somewhere. The one thing that's pretty consistent is when we do our projections, you can almost slot Army in for X amount of rushing touchdowns every year. And the biggest thing that we try to work out is how are we divvying those up this year,
It's
right? So
super difficult, right? Yeah, like to your point, we if you slot them in for 40 touchdowns every year, but he had an outlier season of 32
daily,
going to the
yeah.
quarterback, right? Like it's really hard to kind of distribute the projected touchdowns there. So
Who do you have as your last player on this list?
yeah, this is just a guy, a tight end, so it's not of high value. But if you're gonna punt on a tight end a little bit, you don't get some of those high end guys. I really like Ethan Connor at Troy. This is a guy that I, kind of paid attention to a couple of years ago when he was coming out of JUCO. I remember there were some glowing reports. He used to be a Wildcat quarterback when he was at JUCO a couple of years ago. He had quite a few rushing touchdowns back in his sophomore year. It hasn't totally panned out to this point, the change in the coaching staff, but last year before his season-ending injury in the first four games, he had 12 receptions on 15 targets, right? So, you look at Troy, the head coach is a former tight end position coach, and we've got a lot of vacated targets with Devontae Ross now
Yeah.
out the door to Penn State. And we project Ra Thomas to be that wide receiver one, but do we really, really know how that wide receiver room's going to shake out? So, again, those targets kind of got to go somewhere. And I think Ethan Connor proved, in those first four games last year that he's a pretty good tight end, and you can get him in round 30 of your best balls. So I think he's worthwhile taking a shot on.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm gonna cheat on this one a little bit because when I was doing the list, I was like, I don't know where I want to go, and I was thinking I was gonna put Giovanni Gibson on here because I know Oklahoma needs a wide receiver too in that offense. They're gonna need at least a second option, but he's returning from injury. There could be a number of options that are involved there. You can get him late, but I went another route, and I think sometimes for me, and I think about this because I just did this in a best ball draft. I really like the Georgia tight ends. I really like Oscar Delp and Lawson Lucky. And so what I did is I basically punted on tight ends through 2/3 of the draft and decided to take Delp and Lucky. I think it was in back-to-back picks in round like 25, 23, 24. I don't know. I forget where it was. And I kind of like that because, with Georgia, we look at their offense and there's really no wide receiver that really we look at and say that guy's just an absolute stud. And yet, look, there's no Brock Bowers in this offense, but we know what Georgia's offense can do at the tight end position. And I think Delp feels a little bit more of the safer option, where if you read some reports, Lucky's kind of got that top end potential right now. So I'm thinking, you know what? You can get both of those guys late. Georgia doesn't have a bye for a few weeks in the season. You might scoop yourself up a decent tight end right there, if not have two viable options at some point during the season. But those are two guys I like really late in draft at the tight end position, on top of the tight end that you gave us.
Can I just add one caveat to that? And
Go ahead.
you
You can
may
always
agree.
add a caveat whenever
You
you want,
may
Mike.
agree or disagree. Rule of thumb for me, I do not draft Georgia players in a redraft. I am fine with drafting the tight ends in a best ball, but you cannot predict quarterback, running back, wide receivers, tight ends, unless it was Brock Bowers. I don't think you can predict them on a weekly basis. So
Yeah,
yeah, I'm totally with you on Georgia tight ends for a best ball, but I don't touch them in
That
redraft.
that's a good point, and that was the draft I took him in. Which if I'm going to share that philosophy, I may as well share the whole tight end philosophy I had. I took four tight ends: Oscar Delp, Lawson Lucky, Hogan Hansen from Michigan, with who's the
Marlon Klein.
Marlon Klein. There you go.
Yep.
And I was like, man, I've got a decent tight end week to week every week now. So, but you can get those guys late. So that's it.
Yep.
That's my list, man. You want to throw a cheap one out there since I basically threw out 37 guys there in the last 2 seconds?
Let's see. I got Big 12 depth charts up here. I mean, Miles Montgomery for UCF. Rayshawn Sanford, the sophomore running back for Houston. Again, these are round 30 dart throws.
Yep.
Sanford, I think, starts over Dean Connors there at Houston. So I don't know, just a couple names to throw out there.
Love it. Well, look, we may do some more of these, man. It's fun. As preseason camp comes in, it's easier to do some of these 15, 20, 25-minute shows. So we may get used to doing some of this. So that's going to do it for this show. We took a look at the biggest position battles that we have, maybe the under the radar position battles or those not getting a lot of attention, and then also late round sleepers. So that's two more shows we've just added to our preseason preview series. All the content is updated on the site. Projections will be updated as news comes in from around the country. Drafts are heating up. The end of July is here. August, right around the corner. It's draft season. We're in the heart of it. Get in, get your preseason fantasy draft guide, become an All-American or Heisman member. Get in that Discord. Can't wait to see you guys, but we'll see you on the next show. For my partner, Mike Bainbridge, my name's Joe DeSalvo. We'll see you soon.